Okay, it looks like we're live.
It does.
It does. All right. So, hey, everyone, welcome to today's decision table where, ironically, the tables are turned. And today I've got the fabulous, fantastic Kira Marie Moore, who is going to be a guest on the decision table. Now,
feels a bit uncomfortable being the guest on the decision table.
Yeah, usually when you're the host, it's like, you kind of like call the shots, you run the show. But sit back and relax, Kira Marie. This is going to be fun.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, well,
excellent.
For me,
I'm a bit nervous what questions you might ask me.
Well, look, let's just have a conversation and see where it goes,
Okay,
That's
cool.
kind of what things are about, right?
Yeah.
We're talking, this month we're talking about the muscle of human intelligence, right? And that's been a concept that we've been discussing for some time behind the scenes as well. But let me just ask you, when you're talking about the muscle of human intelligence, what does that look like for you?
Yeah.
What does that actually mean?
Well, for me, the muscle of human intelligence is this most simple way for me to explain it is that it's the data in which you have as a human. And I think that what we do with that data, how we use that data, how we can make sure that that data is giving us the results, that's kind of the fun piece. And that's where all this work comes out of, being able to use the muscle of human intelligence.
Where do you see would be the major applications of this muscle itself? Where do you see it to be the most beneficial?
So the muscle of human intelligence. So using human intelligence as part of your, input, output, it's an interesting concept in itself, I think. Where you use that the most is in everyday. Like I seriously think that all it is around humans starting to make smarter decisions, I think that there's a lot about human race where we've forgotten to think for ourselves. And so it's humans that are starting to think for themselves and then, make smarter decisions that then has a different output or impact, as we would say.
I like how you just went down that path that as human beings, we've kind of lost almost that ability to make smarter decisions for ourselves. I wouldn't mind digging into that a little bit deeper and actually asking you, why do you think that's happened? And when do you think that happened, that we actually lost that ability to decide for ourselves?
Yeah, so I think there's a fair few things that come into play here. I think the fact that as humans, we never like confrontation. We don't like when things are difficult. We don't tend to go, oh, yay, it's a challenge. Let's go and be challenged and let's live in a challenge today because that sounds really awesome. That is not the norm. And so in this case, I would say that humans tend to walk away from things that are harder and we go where it is easy. And this is not an easy thing. It's not because maybe you have to own something. Maybe you have to even become aware of something. Maybe you have to do it differently. And that can be really uncomfortable, right? Like standing out from the crowd, doing things differently, maybe even you having to learn a different skill, a different way to disrupt that pattern. And as human beings, we tend to run away from things like that. As human beings, we want it. We go, where's that button or that secret pill that we can take that then gives us the ability to express pathway to where we want to go? And that's not always a great, it's often the quickest way to get to places, but it's not most beneficial. And I think that there's a lot of that. I think there's a lot of humans that it makes it easier that you kind of go, well, the system has created it this way, so that's what we do. That's how we do it. And I think that's where it's so much easier not to go against a system that has already been established. And so, you might be the only one that feels this, and I'm sure you're not. Here's the thing, I'm sure you're not. But as humans, we go with a crowd rather than going as with the few. Like it just tends to be the way that it happens, right? It's like fear of missing out. If I don't go with the crowd over here, then maybe, I'm going to miss out on something. And here's the other piece. I think it's much harder. when you're going in pathways that are not necessarily the pathways everyone else knows.
So let me ask you this, because I think that's a really interesting point you raised, is that as humans, we're very tribal. You know, we like going with the crowd because there's safety in numbers, there's safety in our tribes, right? I think that's kind of hardwired into our DNA in many aspects. But when it comes to actually that ability to think beyond, beyond the tribe and beyond the community and beyond the safety, do you think our ability to do that has been impacted by our environment? Do you think our ability to stop taking those decisions and exercising that muscle of human intelligence is because of where we are at this particular point in time? Or is that also something which innately what makes us human?
I think it's a combination. And here's the thing, there's never ever, and this is what I truly believe, is that there is never ever one fixes all. There's not one thing that will work for everybody, because there's so many other variables, yet we have systems set up for one thing. We say this is the model to go and do because this will work. Well, yeah, maybe if that's exactly what is needed and that is how it works in our world, but there's always variables. And I think when you think for yourself as a human, you get to start investigating what these variables are and taking into consideration and using that data to make better decisions. And I think that our environments in this way has created it for us to get lazy, to go, you know what? It's much easier if we just put this input in and then we get that output. Or we rely on AI to help us, or a piece of technology or a system or a process or other people who have done it the same way, and we just do it because we don't know what the other options are, because we're not thinking so much as humans. And I think that I think this is detrimental to the human race. I think that there's a cost to it. There's a cost to it because we are relying on whoever created that piece of AI to make those decisions for us. We're creating on systems of whatever it was when those systems were put in place to still be a truth now, and to move forward in, and we're relying that everyone knows best what is best for us as individuals and then what we're doing.
But that's not always the case, and I don't think that ever has been the case, is it? Like, if we're constantly relying on others to kind of direct and guide our life, then we're surrendering that ability to think. That's what I see it as. And the way I'm looking at it right now, I think that's always been the way that human nature has been. Like from our primal days, if you're a believer in evolution, we've always been creating tools and manipulating our environment to suit us. Whereas when we look at the rest of nature, they're evolving with the environment to suit the changing circumstances, the geographies, the climate, everything like that. Humans are unique that way. But is this uniqueness and this this ability to think actually now kind of cannibalizing itself?
Totally, because here's the thing, and this gets me irritable, because I think as humans, we are not, and this is why I think now leadership should be a continuous evolving journey, that we have got to get back to that, of where we are okay to evolve. We're okay to make mistakes. We're okay to go through challenges and work through those challenges and learn from those so that we can springboard forward. I think that there's so much fear of us evolving because there's a lot of uncertainty when you evolve. There's those opportunities for something different to happen. And as humans, we tend to go back to what is comfortable, what is the norm, what is the thing that we know. And I think that we were given so many brain cells and we don't even use, like we only use a tiny amount of those. What if we were able to access more of that? How good would that be? Like, that is data that is already in your DNA that you can now link into. And I think that there's so much strength and power. And I think, and I always say this, that it's the secret advantage to growth in all that we do and say. as a human race, and whatever that calling is that you are called to do in life.
I love that, because you're right. We are only just using a portion of our brains, and that's interesting, because I know they were saying that Einstein would use about 10% of his brain, and he was probably one of the most intelligent people we know.
So imagine what that other 90% could have brought to the table if he knew how to access that. And I really learned this. I learned this because, Ethan, he was born with half his brain damage, speckles on the other side. And when I was told when he was still inside of me at 28 weeks that this was the case, I went immediately back to that concept, that thing that I'd been told. We have all these brain cells that I could never understand, by the way. We had all these brain cells, but people didn't access them. And I go, what if we start accessing that?
Yeah.
What possibility does that bring? What as opportunity will that now allow us as a human race? And I used that in the scenario with Ethan, because I was like, okay, so you're telling me that half of his brain is brain damage and speckles on the other side, but where there's no speckles, there is potential for us to link into that DNA and start, gathering data, putting data into it, because he had to put some data in there, by the way, because here was the thing. They were right that the side that he spoke on was totally brain damaged. But he now, like, putting that data into there, allows us to then access data that's in there now, but rejig the cord, the lead to where it was into before, and put it into that. And you've seen him on the decision table. He has a voice, and he doesn't hold back on it.
See, that's amazing. So you've given us an example of how you can tap into that. And I think there's two questions which are coming to mind, and they're kind of both interrelated. Is it that we don't know how to tap into that extra part of our brain, or is it that we don't want to tap into that extra part of the brain?
I think there's two. I think that you bring up great points on that. That there's two sides. Again, humans, when it's uncertain, when it's something new, when there's even power involved in it, it can be a scary concept. Why would we go there? And here's the other thing, like, unless it's proven, how do we know that this works? Well, there's so many different ways in which I see it in play, and I've seen it so powerfully used in the work that I do. I've been caught into some pretty full-on, emergencies. And right from a guy who had a gun who was going to go shoot someone else. And you've got to understand, within a couple of hours, for him to rejig the pattern of, hey, I want to go shoot someone because they've done me wrong and I can't handle this any longer, to going, hey, guess what? I actually have a future. I have a hope, and this is not going to give me the future or the hope that I want for the pathway forward. Within 2 hours, he switched from that, and absolutely, has never gone back on that. Now, another situation was a guy that has worked for our, he was a secret intelligence guy, went underground for 2 years, got so dark. That's what he kept saying, dark, 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 dark. And literally was at that point of no return. And, when you had, I saw you on your phone just a second ago, when you have a phone, you weren't allowed to have the phones in the room when I was working with them. You had to have it outside. If we went outside, we'd bring all our equipment inside. So that's how like dark he was about everything and what is happening with us, and who's doing what, where, how, all that sort of thing. Well, within, like, it was just so powerful. Within a VIP day with me, he turned it around and he goes, I know how I'm going to be the light to the world. I know how to live a life that I am wanting to live, and I'm not afraid of this. And it's those moments that you go, you can't deny it, but it's not necessarily things that are what we've learned as feedback. to giving us the data that this is a thing that is working. And I think that's the difficulty sometimes when you're working in a field where, although we've got a lot of data around how it's been so powerful for people, it's not like you can say, because you're now making smarter decisions because you're using the muscle of human intelligence, that you are now, you've quadrupled your bottom line, right? It's those kind of things that make this difficult. So humans want to know, if I'm going to go down this pathway with you, I want to know, what am I getting from this? And I think that sometimes is the tricky piece when it's a new thing. And so humans won't necessarily go that way. I know that was a long-winded to that particular piece of that question, but I think that that's so important to understand that when it is the tricky piece of something new, humans want others to go first.
Yeah.
To experience it, and then I'll see if that worked for them, and so it's not the norm, right? And I can't remember, there was another piece to that, and I can't remember what that was.
Well, we were talking about, do they want to, or is it just they're not able to?
Yeah. So then it's, and no, the other piece was, do they know how to? And I think that, and I think that that's the piece. Of course, it's a new thing. It's a skill to learn. There's things to learn about it. There's ways to work out what your patterns are. And I mean, I've been fascinated with that for many years, particularly when I started with youth. And it really, many, many years ago, I would work with street kids, gangs, the real low social echo, sort of front line of humanity kind of people, right? And when that happened, it was awesome when you're there, when you put on these programs, when you're the one motivating and exciting people.
Yeah.
And I just thought, well, what happens when you're not there? And I would hear these stories of young people going back to their old ways, going back to what they didn't want to. Now that they knew there was a different option, they didn't want to go back there. But when your default DNA is linked into that piece, it's always going to go back to your default. And so there's so much to, like there's a skill to it. There's a mastery of it. And like any muscle, if we don't use it, guess what? It fatigues. It wears out. It's, like there's ways to do it and ways not to do it.
That's a really, really important thing, because we're talking about it as the muscle of human intelligence. So like any muscle, it needs to be used, it needs to be stretched, it needs to be rested, it needs to be fueled. Yeah. Correct.
And that's why I'm so strong on it being a muscle, because having been in the fitness industry, I know all about muscles, and with my own physical journey, the importance of being able to work through that, not against it. And so there's just so much to it. And our brain is a precious part of our body that, we've got to look after just as much as everything else. And it's one of the reasons I'm always looking for hacks to do life easier, because I know stress is not a good thing, and I've not always been good at managing stress, and I realized I needed to do that better as my capacity as I wanted to grow my capacity. I had to learn how to lessen some of those things, and at first that was not an easy thing. Much easier now, much easier.
Let me ask you a question on something you mentioned a little bit earlier, is that we were talking about people would like to see, they don't always want to be the first to do something because of the discomfort factor. I want to take this to that next level where sometimes, and I like to think of myself in this category, and I'm sure you do too, is that we're so far ahead of our time that no one gets it. Yeah. And that's like that muscle of human intelligence, where you can see things, when you can identify, new patterns, new opportunities, new ways of thinking, new paradigms, literally, is what you're seeing. But other people are just like, oh my gosh, like either you're mad or you're just way ahead of your time.
Yeah. Sorry, what were you going to ask about that? I can just talk so long about that, because This is where I believe it's pioneering leadership, right? And what I'm doing right now. And all I can say is, if you're willing to step out into something different, it's always going to be a lonely journey.
Yeah.
Until you can start communicating what that looks like. And I think that was the difficulty in my journey at first, was I knew that, and I could see these patterns of what was starting to evolve, and what I could see with certainty was working.
Yeah.
But then I had to prove it. I had to test and measure it a lot. And then I had to figure out what was it that actually happened and how did that happen. And that is kind of geeky. And I had to go into a very geeky space of my life and get lost in there, and then come back and go, how do I communicate that to the world? And what does that look like? And that is kind of, firstly, you have to believe in yourself so much. And that has been I've not always believed in myself. I've not always known that I could do things. I definitely didn't think I was a smart person for many, many years, because I didn't grow up in an environment where they said, hey, by the way, Kira-Marie, you are so smart. You can do whatever you want to. You can be whatever you want to. I wasn't brought up in that. I was actually brought up way the opposite. And so all those patterns, that things like those being spoken into your life, or then it gets into your DNA, I had to disrupt that, interrupt it, and then change it. And so I've had to learn to believe in myself. I've had to go, you know what, don't give everyone else a hard time because they're not coming with you on that journey. And understand that maybe it's because they have no idea what I'm talking about, what I'm even thinking, and maybe I'm not even talking their language, right? And I realized I wasn't for a long time. And then it was really important to go, okay, now I know what I'm about. I know what I stand for. I know what that looks like. I know what the muscle of human intelligence is and how to work it and to really master it. Then how do I now communicate that and bring it back into the space of, to help others to be able to use it and exercise it, right?
I'm glad that we're having this conversation now, because if it was, even a few hundred years ago, people who thought like this would be persecuted. I mean, we look at people like Da Vinci, we took Galileo.
But we have been, like, I'm even persecuted to this day, like, seriously.
And I was going to say, I think the persecution still exists.
It's just different.
It's just a different form, but you're not kind of being put to death over it. Like, you'd be classified as a witch or a sorcerer, or just insane. I mean, as I said, look at Galileo, who said that when we don't live in a geocentric, heliocentric universe, the universe doesn't revolve around us, and he was blasphemy, right? We look at Da Vinci, who's designing submarines and aeroplanes and stuff in the Renaissance, and it didn't come into its fold until the mid 20th century. But you look at people like Nikola Tesla, who's talking about transmitted electricity, who is deemed absolutely erratic and lunatic, and now we're talking about people thinking, wow, imagine if we could implement Tesla's stuff. This is the type of thing, is that you're at a point where when you're that far ahead, you are being kind of, persecution now is different. It's almost ostracism. It's almost no longer socially acceptable. Yet intelligence is something that I find in today's community, people aren't valuing it. They're valuing other things. And so for hyper-intelligent people, and especially for people who have got that muscle of human intelligence exercised, that stretching, and have bulked it up, how do they work in today's society? Because as you said, it's a lonely game, right? Leadership can be lonely, but they shouldn't have to be. So how can we get more of these geniuses together? And I say geniuses like this, not in the derogatory sense, but that's the only word I've got to describe people who think that.
I always talk about it's being in your genius zone. And so when you're really mastering the human intelligence, you're able to really access your genius, and that's what I love about it, is your genius is so unique. It's different to the person down there. And so out of that, the opportunity to then innovate new solutions to help always talking about this, but narrowing the gap from problem to solution, right? Like, I love the fact that we can be genius in our own genius zone, because if I'm being that, you're being it, then there's possibility for us to come up with something different. I think what scares me the most at the moment of what's happening across the world is the fact that we are so pushing against people to think differently, to act differently. And it's so uncomfortable when you do. And I get it. It's not fun being in a place where you have to maybe have different people from different cultures, different thinkings, different education. They bring all those variables that I talked about earlier on to the table. And I think that the interesting but difficult thing about this is that when you bring that, you have different ways you communicate. So you might be hearing what I'm saying right now. How you're translating that could be really different to what I'm actually trying to say here. And I think that it's so easy when it's new and someone's got something different to say. It's easier to push back on that and say, hey, they're just trying to push against the system. They're just trying to disrupt. And I hated the word disruption for so long for this reason, because to me, I was always called a rebel because I thought differently. I didn't do things the same way. Yeah. And so when people used to say, you're like a disruptor, I hated that word. And I hated using disruption, even though that was literally what I'm fascinated with, which is disrupting patterns. Yeah. And it's not because I'm trying to be a rebel. It's because actually what I want to figure out is how can we get the result we want, the success at the table that we want, make better decisions because we know how to wire to something that's going to give us a pattern that then gives us the behaviors and the results, right? And so that's kind of weird thinking, but it's how I've thought. It's what's created the IP that I teach these days. And going back to it, it's not always been accepted. I can tell you a story of she's a very, very, very well-known woman in the USA. And I won't say her name, but I'll never forget how she literally said, I just don't understand you. Why, she came up to me one day and she said, I just don't understand you. And I go, okay. And she said, and I don't understand why you just won't answer questions or you won't stand up and talk in front of everyone. And firstly, when she said that, I said, well, I'll speak when I think people are willing to listen to what I've got to say. I won't speak if I don't feel like I'm going to add value to the room. And so I will keep quiet. But if I feel that I've got something here to add value, then I will speak up, not a problem. I have no problem speaking up. But I said, I also won't just give you what everyone else is answering, because if everyone's answering that and wanting to hear that, then why would I spend energy on answering just the same way as everyone else? And she goes, wow, you're really weird. But I'm starting to like the weird. And that was the end of that. And I remember saying to a person that actually was in the room at the time, and she was like, are you going to let her get away with that? And I said, yeah, because I said, watch this space. One day she's going to come back. One day she's going to come back into my world and start wanting to know. Do you know, before, just after the pandemic had sort of hit the world, I happened to be in a group that she was running, and she called me out and she said, I just want to say that I didn't understand Kerry Marie, but I'm beginning to understand her. And I realized that she was in front of the times, that she's ahead of where we're at, and we are just starting to catch up now. And that is hard, right? How do you connect with people that maybe don't sound like you, that maybe they don't say it like you do, or they might ask questions, not because they want the answer that you're used to, but because they actually are curious. And that's me. And it was like, it doesn't fit into the norm. It doesn't fit into how we've done it in the past. And because of that, it causes, like I said, it causes isolation. It causes that people think you're disrupting. People don't understand what you're saying. And so they kind of go, we don't value what you bring. There's a whole lot of things. And it's, you know, it's been such a journey for me. And it's I'm hearing it more and more from amazing global leaders who want to sort of break out of what people have known them as, to start going, actually, this is what I really want to be known for. How do I bring this into it?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I so resonate with what you said there. Having kind of been through that myself, right? And, you know, it's not to kind of toot my own horn thinking that I'm a genius. I know quite honestly that my thinking is so different from everyone else's. But here's what I'm finding. It's systemic. The discrimination against intelligence is actually systemic. Our education system isn't equipped to handle people who think outside the square. Our social system, our political system.
But what is that square? What is that box? Who put it there, right?
I don't know who put it there, but it's kind of holding us prisoner, right? It's a good question. Who did put it there? Is it by social agreement? Is it by social norm? But it is that I honestly feel that this type of intelligence, this type of thinking, there's a systemic unacceptance of it, right?
Yeah.
No one wants you to think that differently. They want you to conform, and conformity is something that Ethan was speaking about the other day. And I, you know, what he said just kind of like hit me like a ton of bricks. That conformity is one of the limitations to human evolution, especially the evolution in thinking. Yeah. From a mother's point of view, how have you seen that?
Yeah, look, so many cases, I guess. And, you know, one being going back to Ethan, I could have conformed to what the world said to do it medically. And every time I did, we had disaster zones. And so I had to really research different. I always, you know, and this is part of what I work on, but like, I think that there's such an ecosystem to anything and everything we do. And that's us personally. It's us as we should be thinking that in companies and organizations, and the way that we're creating things, that we are not just one pathway to get to the result we want. And in the case of Ethan, it was very easy for me to conform to what the medical was saying. This is the only option. And it started right when he was a little baby. And I'll never forget this moment, because I'm one of those chicks that go, breastfeeding is a good thing for your baby. And so I get it when you can't do it. I'm not hassling anyone in that way, but for me, it was something I always wanted to do for my baby. So when he was born, I was like pumping out this milk because I always thought I'd be breastfeeding at some stage. And I realized that I was pumping out this milk and we were putting this formula into him. Well, it wasn't even a formula. It was just like, I don't know what it was really. But, and I just go to them, when am I going to be like switching out from this, whatever you're putting in there with all the chemicals and things like that I said, like, if we don't even think that he's going to make it beyond, like, you didn't even think he was going to make birth. I think he can make it. And I just set 10 years was my first goal, right? He's going to make it to at least 10 years of age. That was my first sort of, you know, goal. And I remember them saying to me, oh, we think it's going to blow his stomach up if we put milk in. And I said, so what have you got to back that up? And they said, well, actually, we don't. But because you understand, Ethan was born, well, actually, while he was inside of me, his stomach was bigger than his head. So
Oh,
they
wow.
had to actually take out a liter of fluid out of him before while he was inside. And so he came out like with this massive swollen stomach, right? Full of fluid. And so they were worried if they put milk in there, that's going to mix with that. That's going to blow him up. And I go, so what research do you have on this? Like, what backing do you have to this data that you bring to the table right now? And they go, we don't. We just don't know. Wow. And I realized that day that I had to become his advocate, and I had to go research, and I couldn't find anything else, but I could see that the benefits came when you used your breast milk, and the benefits, the best benefits for him would be to get the nutrients that I was going to be able to provide by giving that good milk, right? So I did that, and guess what? His stomach didn't blow up. Look, it was such a journey, and it was only the start of it. And later we found he was allergic to so many things, and goat's milk was the only solution. Much later, by the way, this was like a year later or something. Or no, maybe even just in the months. But anyway, what was interesting about it was I could have listened to that. I chose not to. I did my own research, couldn't see any other, and I said, so if I don't do it now, does that mean he'll always be tube fed for the rest of his life? And they said, yeah. And I said, well, I'd rather give it a go now and try to, we're not actually, because he wasn't thriving. He screamed. He was miserable for the first 2 years of his life. It was like he just literally screamed 24/7. And so in his case, I then I go, okay, let's just give him a little bit. Oh, it didn't blow him up. Oh, I can now do that, and I don't need to tube feed him. Let's get him without that. And so that began it. And I think that this is where it's so easy to think and trust that others know better than you. And maybe, just maybe, you've actually got some really important data in your head. And I think part of having human intelligence is this intuition, or the gut, that gut feel. Is when you trust the data that has been put into your head and know how to trust that data, then we can, bring that data out and use it for things that maybe are different and get a different result.
Yeah.
So I know that's long-winded, but it taught me a lot that one moment, and to trust. And I became very much, I'd be in the ICU, and no word of a lie, the professor would know that I was on there, and he would have students, and he'd bring the students into the ICU to have conversation with me, to talk about my thinking and my insights around how and what and things like that. So I know that, when you've got the muscle of human intelligence, you ask me the question, who does this relate to? It relates to anyone, any industry, anything that you're doing. It's us as humans thinking smarter, making better decisions.
From what I love the story. I love hearing that journey. It is just so awesome. It's so inspiring too. But the biggest takeaway for me, just by listening to that, is conformity is actually the dampener for exercising that muscle of human intelligence. And conformity, I mean, there's been numerous stories and anecdotes and stuff like that around conformity. We all know conformity doesn't work, yet we're too scared to step outside of that box. I postulate there's probably two reasons. I think there's two reasons why. A, as I said, I don't think we know how to, and B, we're too scared. And I think fear plays a massive, massive role in it, because we don't want to be different. Different seen as weird. Different is seen as not good, right? I didn't like being different. No. And in fact, even to this day, there's moments when I go, I just want to be like everyone else. Like I said that to you yesterday. Sometimes I just want to think like everyone else. I don't want to think different. I don't want to know that if we do it this way, that there's other ways that we could actually think of and get different results. And so, I don't,
it's not always comfortable. Like I always talk about the fact that we need to be comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. For me, I learned that power of that because I had to have many uncomfortable conversations with myself because I didn't know who else could talk to me in that way, right? Like and go, hey, Kira-Marie, are you thinking? And this is what I've done. Are you thinking so crazy? I've had the privilege to connect with Richard Branson a few times, and I really love and respect the guy. I never wanted to meet him because I thought he was a legend, because I actually thought the opposite. And I let my biases come into that. But when I connected with him, I realized he's just such an amazing guy, and I love it every time I get to hang out with him. But here was one of the biggest lessons. It was the very first time I met him. I was on Necker Island, so the island that he owns, and this is home. And there were two particular times there that just made such a difference to me. And I think that I use this a lot even now when I feel uncomfortable, when it's I've got to be in those uncomfortable moments. And he just came out of we'd been in a leadership meeting, and I'd come out and I was with a few people, but we were kind of to the side and out of the bush. This is the sort of thing Richard does. Out of the bush, out of nowhere, he just jumped out and he looked me straight in the eye, Nikhil. He looked me in the eye and he goes, "You." And he whacked me on the arm, because that's the kind of thing that we were just mucking around with each other. And he goes, "You." And he just said, "You are amazing." That was it. That was it. And for me, that was like, when the Pope kind of anoints you, or it was one of those moments, because I had shared my heart and soul on what I was thinking. He saw me. And so I began to see myself from that moment onwards.
Yeah.
So that was one. And the second one was, I was like, I've got all this craziness, the way that I think of ecosystems, and I don't even know where all this came from. I don't even really know what I'm talking about, but I know it's real, and I know, and I was starting to doubt myself big time. And it was one of the reasons I connected with Richard. And he just said to me, when I asked him, "Hey, you must get all these opportunities. You must think of all these companies. What can you do? How do you do that?" And he just didn't hesitate. He said, "Kira-Marie, I don't go, what do I do? I go, who in my world do I know that can do this piece, that one?" And it was like this moment there, I go, all these things, all these amazing, and my world, there are so many pockets, so much that makes this ecosystem. I realized it was not all about me. It's about who in my world is going to come on this journey, and how do we now play that out and make this change happen. And so those two things were massively powerful in just knowing that even though I felt crazy a lot of the time, I wasn't crazy. In fact, I was right on it. And so sometimes when I start doubting myself, or hitting against a wall, because it's just it's that old style versus new thinking.
Yeah.
Right. And I'll go to someone really smart and I'll go, "Hey, am I just being really crazy right now? Or am I actually, does this make sense? Should I, is there something I'm missing?" And so I now know ways to keep me on track on that way. But that's a tricky piece when it is pioneering, when it is doing things differently, when it sort of bumps against the norm, all those things that we've talked about.
And I look at that when you're saying it, and there's people out there who are feeling the same, right?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't mind taking a couple of moments now, Kira-Marie, to look at how you're bridging the gap between the problem out there, where people are awesome thinkers, but they're kind of isolated. And I wouldn't mind looking at how you're bridging the gap to that solution, because you're doing some awesome things. And at least over the last 30 couple of days, you've been talking with some incredible thinkers, some amazing leaders out there. And I know there's a bunch of people out there who are asking, Kira Marie, I love your stuff. How do we do more of this? How can we get involved?
Yeah.
How can we connect? How can we, and you're doing some amazing stuff around that. I'd love for you to share with the people out there more about this.
Yeah, so thank you. Here's the interesting thing. Like, an ecosystem means that there's different pathways people can come into. Do you remember reading the books when you were little, or younger, or teenager, or whatever, where like you'd read a book and you'd choose you'd start the book and you choose which pathway you wanted to go down.
Oh yeah. The choose your own adventure type books, right?
Yeah, I kind of think of that in our world like that it's like the adventure, like which pathway do you want to choose? Yeah. And so depending who you are and what you do, there are different pathways to come down it. And I think that, one of the things I do is I work with extremes. And because of that, there's extremes, from global leaders with huge movements to like having conversations with former presidents of countries or nations and to literally the front line of humanity. And so many would think that gap is huge, right? And so I think that has been a tricky piece, because I've gone, how do you make sure that you're not leaving people behind on the journey? And so I've worked very, very hard to make sure that there's many different steps. I think the first spot for those that are maybe just entering into this world, I created what we call the 1% movement. And because I think that it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're like the global leader, from the person who is just trying to figure out, how do I be a leader? How do I step into leadership? What does leadership look like for me, right, as an individual? And so what, the 1% movement was brought out onto this, going, hey, it doesn't matter who you are, but if you want to shift the problem from problem to solution, if you want to be a part of that, you can come on board. So, people come on board with the 1%. And then I wanted to go, and that I began writing on my travels across the globe. And part of that was, my biggest insight around that was before the pandemic, isolation was creating a whole lot of damage and destruction within not just leadership, but within culture, like humanity, right? Going forward. Yeah. And so I realized that isolation was a huge issue. And I thought, well, what would be the solution? What would be the solution to isolation? And I really believe collaboration is the solution to isolation. And so I was like, well, as a company, how can we be the example, the role model to really not just saying that collaboration is the answer, but like bringing that as a solution? And so we learned that the best way we could do that is through partnerships. And so we've got 3 different partnerships levels of how people can come in through the door through that. And one of them is the joint ventures. And so we will be releasing in the near future the Global Training Lab. And so, I want this to be a place where we are inclusive to all different ways of learning how to be a better leader. So all things leadership development. And I think, there's so much of an array of how we can do this depending, and it's those variables. What do you need right now? And I want it to be kind of that place that people could go to. And so that's the joint venture side of it. Then there's the middle piece, which is collaborative partnerships. And I always think of this as using a platform that you've built together, or you're building together, or coming together on a platform. And then how do you now bring that into a community? And it might be one that we've already set up, like Human Connection, or it could be a different one that you're bringing in together, depending what part that is. And then how does that play out to helping to, I'm always into economic growth and culture impact. Like how does that create that difference that we want there. And then, of course, it's
Right.
the investor and equity partnerships, really helping to, help others to be able to do this as well. And so that has been an amazing part of what we've had to really shift as really great touch points. And then, of course, there's a few little other pieces, and I say pieces because I go in initiatives, right? Because it depends what it is people are looking for. It's that pathway again, right? Like, I'm always looking for, how can I help people to be more effective in doing that in a bigger and better way? Like, you grow your capacity in that way. And so I'm always looking to how we can create something that is going to be helping the collective. And part of this is the conversations we're having now on the decision table. It's part of that is then bringing that into, having spaces with, with where we're going. But I think the most proudest piece, I have to say, last year for us as a company was the Global Human Intelligence Forum. Because that was kind of like the space in which we started as a collective to see that this is important to use and to exercise the muscle of human intelligence. And, again, I look forward to that this year, the first week of June, for us to be running that again. And the whole theme around that again this year is the ability, the theme is the ability to learn, to understand, and to evolve in leadership. And I think that this is going to be so juicy and so much fun. And I think that that's what's fun, is that we can enjoy this journey. We can evolve together. I don't have all the answers. I'm not the smartest cucumber out there, like literally, but I'm willing to keep learning and figuring out how to, hack our brain better, so that we can be more effective and really use our effectiveness intelligences. And then, I also think that it's so fun because as a collective, we can kind of be learning together as well. And I think, we've got to get past that. This is an isolation thing, that you're doing these things on your own, because there's other people who are doing new things. There's other people who are wanting to have new conversations. There are other people who want to see different results. And that's the exciting piece. There are, and that's what we're trying to do a lot of, is how do we collect as a collective? How do we connect all those people into one spot that we can have more powerful conversations, that we can have, innovative spaces where we can learn new things? And, I'm working on, because it's something that I love doing, I'm going to be literally putting out word if anyone wants to connect on coming in on what I call the growth incubator cycles. And I think that that's so exciting, because if we really truly are to bring sustainable, that doesn't always happen overnight. It's often things that you've got to work on, things that you've got to keep working on. It might be that project that you never get around to, but you want to play and do. Well, I want to run these cycles that people can come in and be a part of. So I know it works well in my life and with the clients that I have in that way. And now I want to do it in ways that others can join in as well and be a part of that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Cool. So we've got the Global Human Intelligence Forum. Yeah. We've got the growth incubator cycle that we've got going at the moment. How else can people connect with you? How else can people
so you've got the 1% movement as the best spot for anyone to connect with me.
So and people can get involved there. Yeah, that'll be cool.
Yeah, like go become one of the awesome humans that put their name up on there as a human that wants to do their one thing. My one thing is to get 1,000 names on the wall of humanity. That's what it's called. And that's what we want people to do is and start coming on that journey with us. Reach out. Like I'm on social media, so I'm around.
So you're on Facebook, you're on LinkedIn, you're on
Yeah, kind of. I'm around. But, the other thing is, well, connect on the decision table. Like, we're everywhere on the decision table. So, this is a great spot too. A lot of people just reach out as well. So,
yeah.
I'm around. I'm here. Yeah.
So, we're not far from the top of the hour now, Kieran-Marie.
Yes.
Just want to do a bit of a pearl of wisdom type drop right now.
Mm-hmm.
Before we go into that, we've covered a lot today. We've covered basically exercising the brain of human intelligence. We've talked about, conformity. We've spoken about the evolution versus, innate human condition. There's so much that we've covered in such a short time. It just amazes me how much we've covered in 55 minutes right now. What was your biggest takeaway from today's conversation?
My biggest takeaway is just bringing it back from complex to simple. I think, the title can scare people, right?
Yeah.
The importance of the muscle of human intelligence. Dude, what is human intelligence? What is this muscle that I speak of? What is, and I just go back. Let's go back from complex. Let's bring it, depending where you're at, let's go right back to simple. Simple is that it's the data that you have as an individual. And we can make a decision today what we want to do with that data, how we want to exercise that data, what we're going to learn from that data, what we're going to leave behind from that data. And then what else can we do to gather more data that's going to be beneficial to where we want to go? And I know this sounds so simple, but I really, truly believe it's as simple as you want it to be.
Yeah.
And that as humans, we can often over confuse things, over complex things. And, like this journey is for anyone and everyone that's willing to want to evolve in what you're doing.
Yeah. And that's really what I loved about that too, is that this, it's inclusive. You don't have to be alone. And my biggest takeaway from that, Kieran-Marie, is that it's okay to think outside of the norm. It's okay to be super intelligent. There is nothing wrong. In fact, I think humanity needs it right now. And so that's my biggest takeaway. It's okay to do you. It's okay to be you. If you're a super smart person out there, if you've got ideas which the rest of society doesn't get, and you might be ahead of your time, then you're not alone. And I think it's okay to do that. What you got to do is we got to connect with more people like that so that they're supporting you. That they're able to foster that inner genius, your own unique genius, as you said. So
can I ask you something about that though? I think is interesting is inclusion. Yeah. Like, it's funny you brought that up, but I speak so much on it because we know that word, and I think this is the other thing, that there's words and then we put our own belief or truth or perspective on that, right? And that's not necessarily what we're saying when we say that. And I think inclusion is such an interesting concept, so important, yet it's not done well. And if we were to do that better, how do we do that as smarter humans of being inclusive? And I think, well, when we are confident with who we are, we are confident to bring what we have, even when it looks different. There already begins a platform to start having different people involved in that conversation, because you don't need to look like me, to sound like me, to be able to have that. And I think this is an interesting concept when you think of these big words that are thrown around. People are wanting to have inclusive culture, inclusive in companies, be more inclusive in how they're building it out. Well, maybe if we had humans that were thinking for themselves, humans that were confident to think for themselves, humans that would bring their genius to the table, knowing that it may look different, I wonder how much more inclusive we would be.
I think there needs to be a shift in how we label inclusivity, right? I think our thinking, I say our thinking, but I'm talking as a collective humanity. I think our thinking of of what inclusion is very limited. And I believe we need to broaden that definition. It's not just around gender. It's not just around, sexual orientation. It's not just around racial, identification. But I think it goes well beyond that. And we've only just started touching on that as a collective species, right? We literally at its infancy. There is so much more to that. I mean, I was consulting to a company a little while ago where they'd introduced a neurodiversity program. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. What is neurodiversity? And even while the idea sounded great, they were still very limited in their thinking around it. So we're really just at infancy. It's a very exciting time if we as a collective species embrace this. So I'm all for inclusivity. I just think we need to think broader than just what we can tangibly, physically touch and see, right?
But here's the thing, just because you think that doesn't mean that it would be a thing. And I think that if humans could think for themselves better, then they would see that this has such opportunity for possibility. And I think that that's the difference. I also think that all this allows people, humans, awesome humans, to have a voice. And they've not always had a voice at the table. And that is so important to me. And, I think what it is it gives you a voice when you know how to master your human intelligence. It gives you a voice to be able to voice the things that are important. There were many things, and I say this a lot because, when you're talking global leadership landscape, you often talk about some very, very big problems facing the globe right now. And when you're speaking in that arena, those problems can feel so major. They can feel so big, right?
Exactly.
And I think that the biggest way that we can start narrowing that is by having different conversations. And that means that we have to have different people at the table, different distinctions, and we have to be able to give them a voice, even though we might not, maybe are not used to it or even know how to do that. Let's begin to navigate that. And I think when you're confident to be able to stand strong in being able to exercise the muscle of human intelligence, this creates the opportunity for you to do this much more effectively and confidently. Even that uncertain ground, which is what a lot of people at this moment are really finding difficult. How do we navigate the uncertain pathway, knowing it's uncertain? How do we be certain with the uncertain, kind of thing?
Yeah, totally. And I think the environment is quite ripe for this conversation right now, given the fact that, as a species, we are united by this global pandemic. Or maybe we're not, but I like to think we are. That we're ready to
we're either more united or more divided. I think it depends who you are.
Depends who you ask.
Yeah.
But I think this is this is a good opportunity for us as a species to have these conversations now, because we need to think at a greater level. And I think people are seeing that. They just don't know where to go. So that's I just wanted to leave. That was my leaving thought. What's your parting thought, Kira-Marie? What word of wisdom, pearl of wisdom could you drop?
Yeah, I guess mine is to give voice and advocate humans as stakeholders at the decision table is my parting thought. And I truly believe that the way that we can do that, one of the ways we can do that is by exercising what I think is the secret advantage, the muscle of human intelligence.
That's awesome. I love that. Well, Kira-Marie, I think that brings us to the top of our hour. Thank you so much.
It does.
Yeah. So let me say thank you for being here, and thank you for being a guest on the decision table.
How random.
How random. I know. Let me just take from you. At the beginning of this conversation, you said that, this was an uncomfortable time. Looking forward now, or looking where we are now, how do you feel?
Yeah, I think what's uncomfortable about it is the fact that You know, this is so dear to my heart. It's been a lot of years of figuring out how to do this well, how to use it well. And I think there's so many things that can manipulate. There's so much that can force us to go, well, this is the only system, model, framework to do it. And I hope that people can see, when, as we continue to bring this conversation throughout this month to the decision table, that really there's so many variables, there's so many pathways you can choose.
Yeah.
But the good thing is we have a choice, and when you have a choice, you can then make decisions to how that looks for you. And I think that's the exciting thing about this newness, even though it's kind of uncertain. How does this work? What does this look like? What is she talking about? Like, you know, all of last month was a new approach to leadership.
Yeah.
And there was so much in that. And it was amazing and so powerful. For those that maybe missed any of those, like, they're all on the YouTube channel. Like, subscribe there. Go check them out and make sure, you know, that you catch up on some of those ones. Because here's the thing, when you have these conversations with different people all the time, we get to learn.
Yeah.
And I love to learn, and I want to keep learning till the day I die. I still want to be learning, like, right up to the end.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's call it a day, Kira-Marie.
All right. Shall I end this broadcast? Because I've got the power to do that.
Yeah, you got the power. Let's end this broadcast, and we'll return to our usual presenter tomorrow.
All right. I hope she rocks up real good.
Oh, okay. I reckon she'll do the job.
Okay. I'm ending the broadcast now.
Now.